Hey everybody, it's Chris. Welcome to another Chris Beat Cancer interview. Today my guest is Annie Grace. Annie is the author of a book called This Naked Mind. And here it is right here. Control alcohol. Now, why am I talking to somebody about alcohol? Well, first of all, alcohol is a known cause of cancer. And beyond that, it can destroy your life. And I think most of us know this, but we somehow tend to forget the damaging effects of alcohol. And Annie has such a unique story. She's got a fascinating story. Like her upbringing is cool, which I'm excited for for you to tell that story. But not only that, but she has let me just say, a very unique approach to alcohol addiction. And it's different than what you've probably heard. And it's different than what you would hear at an AA meeting, for example. And I think it's really powerful. And so I just love Annie. I love her message. I think this is going to help a lot of people. So like if you are struggling with alcohol, if you feel like you're drinking more than you want to be, or if somebody that you care about is drinking more than they should be, or obviously an alcoholic, then this interview is for you. So, having said that, hi, Annie.
Hi, Chris. So good to be here.
Good to see you. You look great. And
Thank you.
you're in Colorado, right?
Yep.
That's great. How's the weather?
It's been really cold. We've been getting even snow in the mountains still.
Oh, yeah.
Middle
You
of
guys got like 2 feet of snow on the first day of summer, right?
yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah. That is
Better than
crazy.
wildfires though, so I'm
Are
happy.
they going to reopen the ski resorts?
They did for a few days.
They really
So
did?
yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. That makes me want to hop on a plane last minute and like go up there. So, why don't we start with your story? Because I just love the fact, and I know this has nothing to do with your core message and mission to help people conquer alcohol addiction, but you just have such a fascinating upbringing story. I'd love for you to share it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was raised in a one-room log cabin at 10,500 feet on the backside of Aspen Mountain. And so you couldn't get there by a car in the winter. We had to snowmobile. And in fact, when I was born, my dad didn't, he was, I was raised this way because my parents were hippies. They wanted to move absolutely off the grid, kind of live their own lifestyle, do their own thing, which is interesting because my dad was born and raised in the Bronx. And so he kind of went polar opposite of that. But when I was up to a year old, he refused to own anything with a motor. Which included a chainsaw. So he was hand sawing all his own wood because we had wood burning stove. He wouldn't have a snowmobile. He would cross country ski in the winter. Didn't have a car. He would hitchhike, and that was just his choices. And then he had a baby, and he's like, okay, well, we have to get a car. We have to get a chainsaw. Those were kind of the priorities. And but there was a spring about 200 yards away. In the winter, you'd have to ski to the spring because you couldn't walk through all the snow, and no electricity. I didn't really know anything different, which is cool. I lived there until I went to college. And I mean, certainly I spent nights at my friend's house and stuff like that. And I was like, huh, this is cool. Like, you actually have a refrigerator that opens all the time. And then all this comedy of errors happened when I first started living in a real house. Like, I'd flooded the entire kitchen because I put the wrong soap in the dishwasher, stuff like that, because I just wasn't really used to doing something like dishes with a dishwasher. It just wasn't in my background or my experience. But an interesting part of that, and how it does tie into my story a little bit, is like neither one of my parents, I never knew them to drink at all. They were
Hmm.
didn't, eat sugar for a long time, didn't eat any meat. They were, very straight and narrow, very kind of pure lifestyle, and alcohol just did not factor in. So I think it factors into my story because I didn't have a cautionary tale.
Yeah, and it must have been weird to be, growing up in Aspen. You're surrounded by a lot of rich kids, right? And so you weren't homeschooled. You actually went to what, Aspen Elementary or
Yep, Aspen Elementary, Aspen Middle, Aspen High School. And I remember all sorts of things. I mean, we were in school with, the celebrities' kids. So like, Will Gibson's son and like all these, Will Gibson is his name, Mel Gibson's son, all these kids that we were in school with were, just the celebrities' kids. I remember there were these two twins, and on their 16th birthday, they each got a Range Rover. One was black and one was white. They brought them to school on their 16th birthday. That was their gift. And so, yeah, stuff like that was just constant all the time. And so I was certainly like the black sheep, but I think it was also my dad did something super smart when I was in preschool. He invited my entire preschool class up to on a snowcat to sled and snowmobile back behind the cabin for the day. And so I kind of like, everybody's like, oh my gosh, you're the one with the cool sled hill. Like you live on a sled hill. And so everybody thought that was super cool. So that helped a lot. He was smart in that sense, but it was certainly different. It was very, very much on the fringe of, typical Aspen life.
Well, did you struggle with insecurity and things as a teenager, being like, you're all rich and I live in a 1 room or 2 room shack with no running water.
Yeah, I remember this moment where I was in this was even before I was a teenager, but I remember 2 things so vividly, and I'm sure there are 2 of several hundred that happen of this nature. I remember once coming to school in some overalls, which my parents would always shop at the secondhand store, and a girl was like, "Those were mine." And it was one of these moments where she said it in such like and of course, Aspen is a tiny town. There's 1 secondhand store. And of course the kids are going to be giving, it made so much sense. She was a grade ahead of me. And, but she just, I don't know, she had drawn and pen on them or something. So she recognized them. And it was I remember feeling like just wanting to hide. Like it was this very deep sense of just like, caught out in something. And especially because I thought they were just the coolest. They were purple. And I was like so stoked on them before this happened. And then I remember going home and being really upset with my mom. And I think now as an adult, that pains me too, because I know that my mom was doing the best she could. And how devastating is it to try to provide your kid clothes and then have your kid just like so heartbroken because of what you did provide. And so that whole thing is kind of this knotted mess. And I remember another time being in the sandbox and this girl coming up to me and just saying, "Your family's poor, right? That's what everybody says." And I was like, well, I don't know. Like I didn't really know, but I remember it just really stuck with me what she said. And I went home and I was like, "Mom, are we poor?" And I remember my dad saying, "Look, we've chosen this. We've chosen this. Like you have to understand this. Like we have money in our families. We've chosen this lifestyle. This is by choice." And really giving me that sense of, okay, you can choose to live on the fringe and you can do it, and I think that's probably really relevant to your audience who like is choosing a different path and a different lifestyle in a different way. And no matter what you're doing with that choice, it can be so intense, but also so empowering. So I think some of those moments really did shape me, but yeah, they were pretty painful in the, in the moment.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, wow. So you obviously came out of that, and graduated high school and then built a very successful career for yourself.
Yeah, so I graduated high school. I went to school for business. My dad had always, along with saying like, this is by choice, he always told me, and you have the choice too. You can do whatever you want to do. You can make as much money as you want. You can be, you can do whatever you want. You have the choice to totally go a different direction than we did. And so like for me as a high schooler, I was like, okay, that's really appealing. I want to be really successful. That was very driving and motivating for me. So I did really well in college. I got into kind of business school and marketing school, and I graduated, met my husband in college. We graduated, we both got master's degrees, graduated from our master's degrees, got married, and moved to New York City, basically within like 2 weeks of these things happening. And I landed a job in marketing for JP Morgan Chase. And so I was all of a sudden in this big time executive role. And then I went on from that job and went to work for, I won't name them because a lot of the drinking story starts at this next job, but they're a London-based company. They're the largest foreign currency exchange company in the world. And I got hired on as their North American head of marketing at the age of 26. So I was the youngest vice president in this multinational company in the States. And I was asked one day, why don't I show up at happy hour? And I mean, I was like, well, I don't really drink. And that was an interesting thing all through college. Yeah, here and there, the occasional party, but it was not relevant to my life. Like um, I was not overly enamored with it or allured by it. I didn't have any kind of the typical, you have your first drink at 13 and then all of a sudden, you're in it and you're drinking every single weekend. That wasn't my story at all. It was here and there and very much like, I don't know. That's not really, I don't even remember having very much thought or emotion about it. It was such a non-issue in my life. And
well, let me just interject too, because a lot of kids who grow up drinking and partying and doing a lot of drugs and stuff like that, and in high school and sometimes as early as junior high, they're very unhappy, right? They're very unhappy on the inside, right? They have messed up families and things, and right, they're medicating, right? It may start as just a way to fit in, but then it becomes more than that, right? It becomes a form of self-medication. And so I guess, even though your upbringing was very different, maybe you didn't struggle as much with the kind of emotions and insecurities and pain that a lot of other kids had, wealthier kids.
It was really a gift, in this bizarre way of, because yes, it was very different, but I was so okay with being different that I had made peace with being different, I think long before most humans make peace with being different. And so what that did, it gave me this sense of not confidence in the sense that I think I'm awesome, confidence in the sense that I think I can handle whatever it is, right? And I only see that now in retrospect. But I was very easily able to mingle and fit in, and especially when I got into college, everybody was fascinated with me. Like the Colorado guys were super fascinated with this whole story. They're like, this is so interesting. So I became like weirdly popular for the thing that made me super unpopular, and it was just this interesting time. But I think that's true when your first drink is answering a need of pain, and when you're experiencing pain. And often when you hear these stories of somebody who's having their first drink at 13, 14 years old, and they will say, that first drink, it felt like I was finally whole and complete and everything was right in the world. Well, alcohol is an anesthetic. It numbs our physical pain. It numbs our emotional pain. They used to use it in surgeries before they deemed it too toxic. And so when you numb pain to that extent and you feel then so good for the first time ever, your brain learns very distinctly that alcohol is the key to that. And that's how addiction can be born. And most addiction that I've seen, when people cross that, arbitrary and invisible line from being a social drinker into really being somebody who has a hard time leaving it, it often happens when you move from social drinking to self-medication.
And I think I should have mentioned this earlier, but this also applies to food addiction too, right? Because a lot of people use food as medication. So I'm kind of regretting at not saying this at the very beginning of the interview, but like this also applies to anyone who is struggling with food addiction. Because the same biochemistry, right, is happening in the brain and the body when you self-medicate with food and alcohol too. So, but we'll get into that. So, okay, so back to your story. You're just sort of this hotshot VP at a foreign exchange company, and they're saying, hey, why don't you come into happy hour?
Yeah. And because I didn't drink, I was like, well, I don't really drink that much. And he's like, well, no, that's not the point of happy hour. Like, if you're serious about your career, we're all too busy during the day. This is where you'll get your face known by the higher ups. This is where you get ideas heard. This is like the golf course for, corporate America. And it's important. And I was like, okay, awesome. And again, with my upbringing, I didn't have a cautionary tale. So I was like, okay, I'm going to double down on this. I'm going to approach this in a very methodical way. And I actually had a method of a glass of wine and then a glass of water, full 16 ounces of water between every glass of wine, because everybody around me was at least 15 to 20 years older than me. They were mostly men. I knew about the person who was dancing on the table during the Christmas party. Like you always have that oddball. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that it was so important to me to just keep my head. In fact, when I stopped drinking, like more than a decade later, people were like, well, I never even really saw you drunk. And that's because I was so intentional about it. But it didn't mean that alcohol didn't get a very firm handle on me, because it did. It really, truly did. But it was very slow. And so from that one first moment of like, okay, I'm going to show up and I'm going to make wine part of my routine, all sorts of things happened where I used to come home after a long day of work and go for a run. I'd come home and I'd pass the liquor store and be like, oh, I'll just buy a bottle of wine. And slowly but surely, the things that I used to do for, to relax, to de-stress, etc., got replaced with, oh, it's easier just to pour a drink. And I can't tell you when that arbitrary line was crossed, but I can tell you, like, fast forward a decade, I had 2 young kids, and I was drinking close to 2 bottles of wine a night. And I know that it was close to 2 bottles of wine a night because I stopped buying bottles and started buying the box, because that mental hang up when you finish a bottle and you're going to open another one is like, okay, that doesn't feel good. So I could, buy the box and hide that somewhat from myself. And I think that really became, all right, I wasn't liking what I was doing. It was not congruent with who I initially set out kind of to be in the world, of who my impression of myself was. I always imagined myself healthy and fit and outdoorsy and all these things. And then all of a sudden here I was really taken with alcohol, to the point where, yes, I could stop drinking for periods of time. Every pregnancy, for instance, I'd stop drinking for 9 months, but I would feel deprived and like I was missing out. Even if I was the designated driver for the night, I would feel like, oh, tonight's not going to be as much fun, poor me. So it felt very much cliche, like this rock and hard place of either I drink and then overdo it and regret it, or I don't drink and I spend my night pining over drinking and missing out.
A couple things. One is that, the box is easier too, because you can just poke a big straw in it, right? And then just kind of like a big juice box.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but the other the serious point I wanted to make, and maybe you could answer it now or maybe a little later in the conversation, but it's interesting to me that you would go for 9-10 months or whatever without drinking, but still feel that urge the whole time, like you were missing something and looking forward to drinking again. And so I'd love to touch on that if you think now is a good time, or as we go deeper.
The fascinating part is that there's nothing clearer to tell you that it's not physical, right? And we're led to believe that, literally led to believe. I had this experience about 6 years before I stopped drinking, where a good friend of mine, we drank together all the time. She shows up one day and she's like, guys, guess what? I'm getting sober. I'm going to AA. And we're all like, whoa, wait, hold on. Wait, what's happening? And I remember asking her, I was like, wait, I drink as much as you drink. And she looked at me and she told me, she said, Annie, no, I went and I learned that I'm an alcoholic, and I was born this way, you're not. And I have to stop drinking because I'm an alcoholic. And it was like literally, and granted, I don't know if that is that's her interpretation of her experience, and I want to give it that caveat. But that was what was told to me. And so I thought, okay, well, if I'm not an alcoholic, by the way, thank goodness, but if I'm not an alcoholic, then all right, throw caution to the wind. What do I need to worry about, right? And so even when alcohol was really, I remember waking up at like 3 a.m. and being like, oh gosh, how much did I drink? Why did I do that again? I only meant to have 2. I had 5, 6. I don't even remember, just waking up and having all this guilt and self-loathing and recrimination and all of these feelings. And then the next day being like, well, there's no, like, what am I going to do about it? I'm not going to go walk into AA where I've been told I'm not like an alcoholic anyway. And besides, that didn't really feel like the next step I was going to take. I had 2 young kids. I couldn't even think, plus my job. I couldn't even schedule time to exercise at that point in my life, much less schedule time for meetings. It just felt so out of the realm of possibilities for me. And so, one of the things that really was interesting to me is that I was like, well, it didn't used to be this way, right? It didn't used to be this way. And I started to really wonder what was going on, what had changed. Why did I have so many amazing memories without a drink? so many times of relaxing or de-stressing without a drink? And why now did I feel like I couldn't even, be happy a few nights if I wasn't drinking, if I took a little break for something? What had changed? And those longer periods showed me that whatever had changed, it wasn't in my body. It was really in my mind, right? Because even if you could stop drinking for a few days, I wasn't having, the things you hear about, delirium tremens or hallucinations or withdrawals. Like, I wasn't really physically or chemically addicted to alcohol. I didn't have words for that at the time, but I knew that whatever was happening was in my mind, because it was so clear that it was like my thinking. And I don't really know how that all the pieces fell into place. It was like just this, God thing, this download of like information of like, okay, whoa, something's happening here. And I formed this theory that was basically that I had this now lifetime of subconscious conditioning, both from the media, from my friends, from my family, and most importantly, from my own experiences and how alcohol actually works on the brain, to confirm that, it's relaxing because it's numbing you from pain. And then you build this thought loop of subconscious conditioning that said alcohol was key to relaxation, to having a good time, to having sex, to socializing, to all of these things. And then when I consciously wanted to drink less because I had these two young kids, because I knew I was overdoing it, these two parts of my brain were just totally at odds. So like my conscious was wanting to make one decision, my subconscious just hadn't got the memo. So I would make that decision and I'd feel all of this desire for alcohol that I didn't know where it was coming from, because I'd consciously decided I didn't want it. And so I felt really overwhelmed by wanting something I no longer wanted. And I kind of furthered this theory and said, wow, conflict, even if we see conflict or even if we witness conflict in our family, it's super painful. But then if we're entering this inner conflict of both wanting something and not wanting it at the same time, and doing it and beating ourselves up from it, it's so painful. And then from all of my experience, what did I learn to do when I was in pain? I'd learned to reach for a drink. And so it was like this self-perpetuating spiral. And so I did something super radical, and I stopped trying to stop drinking, which sounds crazy. But I could see that willpower, shame, blame, rules, no drinking till Friday, only 2 glasses of wine, all these promises that I'd break and break and break, or that I'd keep and would make me miserable, were just totally eroding any self-confidence that I had in myself, any trust that I had in myself. I didn't believe myself anymore. I didn't believe if I said I was going to not drink for, during the week, I didn't believe myself my word meant nothing to me. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to stop trying to stop drinking, and I'm going to just let myself drink whatever I want, whenever I want, but I'm going to make it my mission to understand what changed. I was a perfectly happy 26-year-old adult that barely ever drank. And then all of a sudden I was, a 35, I think, year old adult who felt like, alcohol was the key to everything in life. And if I couldn't have it, then it was not even sort of worth living. And so I was like, what changed? And that really launched me on research into all sorts of things.
Before we get into that, I just wanted to comment on, what you were saying about this conflict that a lot of people have, and we've been conditioned so much in our lifetimes, right, by the media, right? So movies and TV, and even social groups and things, to drink, and that drinking is sophisticated, right? It makes everything more fun, But I think the sophistication is one big thing that people want to feel like they're sophisticated, right? Having a highball or a martini or, a glass of wine or whatever. But it's interesting to me that you said that you brought that up. I love that you brought that up. And the fact that you had, why did you start having conflict? Like, where did the conflict come from? Were you feeling bad? Was it like hangover related? Was it regrets? Was it like mistakes you made while being drunk? Like, where did that, why did you start feeling bad about it?
Yeah, for sure. So certainly there was the physical aspects. it just starts to feel nasty. And the next day, even after you shower, when you can kind of smell alcohol on your skin, and then, you're used to it. So it probably smells even worse. Like just stuff like that was really gross. But there were some moments really with my kids, and that's what really did it. And it was funny because Brian and I, we met, we went to church together. We had this very kind of idea of how we would be when we had kids. And we had sort of said, we're not even going to have alcohol in the house. Like, we just really want to be a good example. By the time we had spent years living in New York City, and then we actually got married and had kids, we both drank a ton. And that idea had gone so out the window. And so now it was this idea of, okay, well, it's totally fine. Everybody else is doing it. And, but part of that was really buried inside of me. And so I didn't imagine myself to be the type of mom who's asking their kid to go get them a beer, right? That wasn't what I imagined. And there was a moment where my 4-year-old at the time, I was like, come snuggle with me. And I had my glass of wine next to me. He's like, no, Mom, you smell bad and your lips and teeth are purple. And it was like, oh, wow, that hurts, right? And kind of laugh it off. And then there was another moment where we had been out, and this was really interesting too, because you also have these other, I call them guardrails in your head. Okay, this is where it's okay to live, and this is where I've crossed the arbitrary line, right? And so some of my guardrails were no drinking in the morning. Well, when you are in charge of 28 countries and you're flying everywhere in business class, and you leave New York City at 10 p.m. and you have, 3 or 4 drinks on the plane, and then you arrive in London at 6 a.m., it's still technically nighttime. And so if I just went and had one more drink to get into the office to make sure I had enough energy for the morning, it wasn't really morning, right? And so I started to cross these lines that it's such BS when I hear myself say it, but in my mind, I was making these justifications. And so it just wasn't sitting right with me anymore. And one of these times of crossing one of these lines, we were living over in London at the time. The company, I was now global head of marketing, so I'd gotten promoted. And we were living in London part-time and here part-time. We were over in London. It was really late night, Friday night. I'd been up to all hours of the night entertaining people from all sorts of different countries. Came home Saturday morning. We woke up. We're going to take our kids to the London Eye. And I just felt awful. And so that whole hair of the dog mentality, I was like, okay, well, we had a huge can of beer in the fridge. And I was like, I'm just going to put this in my bag and I'll just be able to drink it at some point, and then I'll just feel better, so I'm not so miserable with my kids. And it was one of those ding, 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 you shouldn't do that. So I didn't drink it on the spot, but I was like, no, as long as it's after brunch or something, then it's okay. 8 a.m. too early, but 10 a.m., brunch is a thing. So whatever. I was making all these justifications for myself. Long story short, we get into the line at the London Eye, and they are bag searching and going through a metal detector. And obviously you can't bring a 40-ounce can of beer onto the London Eye. And so I take it out of my bag to throw it away, and I dropped it, and it started spraying beer all over both my kids. So they're drenched and they reek. And it was the full 40 ounces. And it was one of those moments Brian and I are looking at each other and we're trying to laugh it off. But inside I was just oh no, this is not who I want to be. So it wasn't really those rock bottom, get a DUI stories, but it was, for me, they were points. They were really low points for sure. And there was a lot of them. Those
just a progressive revelation. Mm-hmm. So you, so we'll pick up your story. You decided to give yourself the freedom, right, to stop beating yourself up, to drink whenever you wanted, but then at the same time decided to start researching and figuring out why alcohol had such a hold on you, right? And then I definitely want to talk about how someone who's written a book about conquering alcohol addiction has attracted so much ire from the alcoholic community.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the same camp, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people in the cancer community that do not like me. They do not like my message. And I know you have the same situation in the alcohol community. I mean, not that alcohol lovers don't like your message. It's people who are not drinking and trying to stay away from alcohol don't like your message. So we'll get to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I took a two-pronged approach. I'm very methodical. I've always been kind of a science girl. I always, it's one of the things I loved about your book. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's so kindred. He's researching all the things. There's all these citations. It's amazing. And so I took this really two-pronged approach to, one, what was happening with my subconscious? Was that a real thing? Did that theory have merit? And how, by the way, can you change your subconscious? And through that, I learned so much interesting stuff from like Carl Jung, starting there, way back in the day too, very modern actually books and things that have written in this hypnotic method to actually give you a complete mindset shift about something just through narrative. And I found that fascinating. And then also I went very specifically into the physicality of alcohol, like what it's doing inside the brain. And I did that. What I did was I wrote a list of every single reason that I liked to drink. And I had this big, huge, long list. And then I went through every single reason and I decided to question it and see if it was true. And that was the entirety of my method. But I questioned it again in two different ways. One was internally. So, I've believed these things, and it's really interesting with that because some of these things I believed, like I believed the sky was blue, like they were just so true to me. Like, yes, everybody knows alcohol relaxes you. Of course, have you watched a homicide detective show? Like, duh, this is what happens. And so it was so true. But then I said, okay, well, I'm going to ask myself a few challenging questions about that. Like, am I relaxed a few hours after drinking? No, I was waking up at 3 a.m, like the least relaxed, like pit of anxiety in my stomach, like tears in my eyes, absolutely miserable. Am I relaxed, the next day? No, I was miserable the next day. Am I more or less relaxed now at this point in my life when I'm drinking this much, or was I before I started drinking this much? And these answers were so clear and obvious, right? But then I also went into, okay, well, what about the evidence? Like, what does alcohol actually chemically do in the brain and the body? And alcohol is amazing because there is so much research on alcohol. Now, interestingly, because we live in this headline culture of social sharing, it's so much sexier to share a glass of wine is the equivalent of half an hour in the gym type article than it is to share any of the tens of thousands of studies about the harm of alcohol. So we hear one message that's alcohol is good for us, whereas the message about actually what the harms are it's incredible. So there was so much research. And one of the things you say, okay, alcohol relaxing you, what does it do? I'll just give you one little example of it's a depressant. When it goes into your body counteracts that depressant with stimulants. Those stimulants are adrenaline and cortisol. It releases adrenaline and cortisol inside the body in reaction to even one drink. Cortisol is the stress hormone. Like that's not a stress-free thing. So then you see it in black and white. And the beautiful thing about that is I liken the subconscious to, I think our brain, it evolved to do some things really well. Seek pleasure, avoid pain, conserve energy, and prove itself right. And so when you show the brain that something is false and causing pain, it very quickly, it just stops believing that. And people will describe the book like a magic trick because they're like, how did you make me not desire this? It's not that you told me I shouldn't drink or scared me into it. It's that through your writing, I don't want to drink anymore. And that feels like freedom. That feels amazing. And that's what happened to me through my research. I just walked into my office one day. It was about 13 months later. And I told my husband, I was like, okay, well, if you want to drink with me, tonight's the night because I'm not drinking after tonight. And he was like, what? Who are you? What have you done with Annie? This makes no sense. And sure enough, we shared a bottle of wine and that was it. And then I just was like, people need to know this. So I put it up, I just figured out how to put a PDF on a web page and 20,000 people downloaded it in the first 2 weeks. It was absolutely crazy. And I started getting letters from all over the world of people like, oh, wow, this helped me too.
That's amazing. And I love the fact that, you're kind of talking about your process of identifying your beliefs, questioning your own beliefs, because so many of us have so many beliefs that we believe are true, right? And we never question. And I mean, I had to do that in my own cancer journey as well. And I love the expression, and I try to be this way, which is having strong beliefs held loosely. So I have strong beliefs for sure, but I'm always reminding myself that I could be wrong, right? That I should never assume I'm right, that I should always, when presented with new information, I should always give it a look, and test it against what I've learned and what I know, or what I believe to be true. And that is really powerful, that when you obviously broke some false beliefs in your subconscious, and then that changed the way your conscious mind, also your subconscious and your conscious mind, viewed alcohol, right?
Yeah, and it shifted my desire. And I think that's what's so different about this is, and it gave me a gift in that I was able to, like, if you look at a lot of journeys to stop drinking, you stop drinking, you white knuckle it, you willpower through it until you have enough time under your belt where you've realized, okay, I can live life without this. And then very slowly you build your subconscious thinking around alcohol through this experience. And eventually you do really find freedom. I have a woman, she wrote an article recently and she's like 10 years later and she's like, I don't know when it happened, but now like I'm totally free. And I was like, oh my gosh, 10 years, that sounds nightmarish to me. Like, I don't want to live 10 years in that state of deprivation of just making it work. But when you actually keep drinking, and I know it sounds totally counterintuitive, it's probably why people in AA don't like me as much, but when you keep drinking, but then apply a mindful filter to it, I was able to say, okay, glass of wine, how do you really taste? How do you really make me feel after the first sip? Some of the things I realized that was so mind-blowing when I started really becoming the observer of my own drinking without the shame and without the guilt. You cannot do it with the shame and the guilt because that just pollutes the whole story and you live in this place of pain. But I realized that I would always, 5 p.m., I was working at home, I'd walk out of my office to the one cabinet where the box lived and the glasses lived, right? And I'd walk out there and I'd open it. And I realized one day I was walking out there and I was opening it and I felt so much better just by doing that. It had nothing to do. And I also realized I'd do that. I'd pour the wine and then I'd set it on the counter and one of my kids would come in and I'd get distracted and a half an hour would go by and I wouldn't have had the first sip. But the whole placebo effect of, I got the thing. It's like time for wine time, like that whole thing, I felt better. I was like, wow, how trippy is that? It's not actually the wine that's making me feel better. It's this whole transition ritual. And that was like just one of my many ahas. And so I think it was really fascinating to be able to observe myself as a drinker. And I actually did something also completely controversial. I didn't know it at the time because I didn't know anything about like really AA or the recovery community or anything like that because my only experience was with this one friend. And so what I did about 40 days, it might've been 40 to 50 days, I don't remember exactly, after I stopped drinking, because I was on such a high and I was like, no, this is the best. I was like so stoked about it all. And then, all my friends are really questioning it. And when is this going to end? And we want our old Annie back and yada, yada. And so I started saying, okay, well, I need to know. I need to know definitively if there's something here I'm missing out on. Like, I really want to know. So what I did, cracks me up still. I was like, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to set up my cell phone on a tripod. I'm going to get a bottle of wine. I actually got 2. And I only could drink 1 because I didn't have any tolerance anymore. And I'm going to get drunk in front of the camera. And I'm going to see, and I'm going to tell myself exactly how each stage feels. And I'm going to see, is there anything really here before I just decide to give, I really needed to know. And through that process, oh my gosh, like I couldn't watch the videos for years. It is awful to see yourself drunk. I mean, like the look in your eyes and how like the light went out from them. It was crazy. I went from this, normally happy person to, it was awful. And the whole lip thing, my lips turned purple and I wasn't funny. I thought I was. And wow, it was just so eye-opening to me. And it was kind of the final nail in the coffin. It was so definitive to me that there was nothing there for me, that I was just like, okay, that's it. And I actually, with a lot of kind of caution and caveat, I recommend people try it and only try it after you have stopped drinking for a while, because we talked about it's mostly mental, but there is a physical addiction. And so it's like, if you are itchy and you scratch, it feels really good, right? But if you're not itchy and you scratch, it doesn't feel good. So liken that to if you're drinking, every drink creates withdrawal that is scratched by the next drink. So if you try this experiment, you've been drinking every day and then you try the experiment tonight, alcohol is going to feel totally different than if you have 30 days where you haven't been drinking, you have no withdrawal symptoms, there's no imbalance in your body created by alcohol. Then you're going to be scratching the no itch, just scratching your skin. That doesn't feel good at all. So it's a completely different experience. So you cannot be actively drinking when you do this. You have to have taken a break, but it is literally mind-boggling how, and you can remember the first time you got drunk, again, unless you were one of the people that really was experiencing emotional pain. I remember the first time I got drunk, I was like, why do people do this? I just feel dizzy. It was not a pleasant experience, but then everybody tells you it's what you do. So you just keep doing it and you end up liking it. And a lot of the liking it is scratching that itch for that the alcohol created in the first place.
You have another book called The Alcohol Experiment.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's kind of what this is about, right?
Yeah, so it really came because it was an awesome experience, but I got a review on Amazon and it said, I read this for my brother and then I don't like beer anymore. Thanks a lot, 5 stars. And I was like, wow, there's lots of people who actually don't need to stop. And it's not even a black and white conversation. We should be lowering the barrier to entry. Right now, the barrier to entry to even questioning your drinking is so high because it's not like you can question your drinking like you question your sugar intake or your carb intake. You start saying, I might be drinking too much. Everybody's like, oh no. Do we need to have an intervention? What's happening? Nobody takes that. So you question it internally. And then, anything that you do in secret is building all the shame and guilt. And I was like, we just need to lower the barrier to entry to this conversation. That same week, I got an email from someone who'd done the whole 30 unsuccessfully until she found my book. And then she's finally like, oh, I could do it now because I could give up the alcohol part with your book. And I said, wow, these things kind of gelled in my mind, this challenge-based approach with this lowering the barrier to entry. And so the alcohol experiment is like, it's just a 30-day challenge. Dip a toe, see how it goes. It's a book, and then it's a completely free online program where you sign up alcoholexperiment.com and every day get a video and an email from me. And it's just the whole day is just like mindset shift over mindset shift to where it really frees you to make what I like to say a conscious, logical decision that isn't swayed by your unconscious desires about what role you want alcohol to have in your life without strings, right? Without this all or nothing. The thing that kills me about the all or nothing is it's basically like, I'm never going to drink again. Well, how are you going to know you succeeded at that? When you're dead, that's.
Yeah. And, I love everything you're saying right now because there's so many parallels between your message and mine. The one thing that I've tried to do for cancer patients and just people that are serious about prevention and maintaining their health is to not guilt or shame them or scare them, away from junk food, right? What I try to do is get them, like I talk about in the book, sort of lay out all the science, all the studies, all the, sort of detriments of eating a standard American diet. But then also all the amazing science, evidence-based nutrition science on fruits and vegetables, right? And get them really excited about eating healthy. So it no longer becomes this sort of like, oh, I can't have that, or like, I don't want to cheat on my diet, which I think is a terrible way to ever, think about eating healthy, right? That like if you eat something that's what I call recreational food, junk food, that you're somehow cheating, which cheating is wrong, and doing something that's wrong invokes guilt and shame, right? Yeah. So it's like removing the guilt and shame from eating unhealthy food and getting people so excited about healthy food that they just want to eat it, right? That's what they want to do now. Like, it's like you saying like, they just don't want to drink now, right? They don't want to anymore. The desire's gone. And so like, just that whole idea of like, using, really powerful information to shift someone's desires toward good things and away from things that'll harm them. So like, we're just doing the exact same stuff, which I totally love. And I also love the fact that, you're addressing the stigma, right? There's this stigma of alcoholism and being an alcoholic. And I'd love to dig into this a little more. And this is really where I know your most controversial uh, opinions that I totally agree with, by the way. Like when you and I had a conversation when we first started talking, a month ago or whenever that was, we really got to know each other. Like you were saying things that I already believed, but in such a more articulate way. I was like, oh my gosh, yes. Like this is so powerful. And so my issue, I've always had this nagging issue with alcoholism and the term alcoholic because I feel like it's an identity all of a sudden. Like someone pronounces this on you, right? You are now an alcoholic, and then you will always be an alcoholic for the rest of your life. So you now have an identity that you have to carry with you your whole life. And like that to me like is so troubling that this is like, basically it's like inception, right? It's like incepted, is that a word? Into someone's mind and belief system that they are now sort of like a victim of this disease, which is it a disease?
It's interesting. I would say that if you look at disease in the sense of something that can cause symptoms, it can manifest as a disease after you've been exposed to it long enough. So if you compare it with type 1 or type 2 diabetes, one you're born with, you have an imbalance from the beginning, and it's not a disease like that. I think that's where the whole alcoholic term gets it really wrong, because when my friend Kristen came up to me and she's like, well, I was born this way, I'm an alcoholic, right? Then instantly I think, well, wait, it's this us and them, you or me. But if over time you drink enough, it does change the brain. It changes, it releases too much dopamine. You have fewer dopamine receptors. It becomes the only thing that can provide you pleasure because it numbs all your other ability to experience normal pleasure. So all these things happen inside the brain. You can change your brain to where it does become kind of manifest as a disease, but very much not like, yeah, you were born with it. It's more like if you eat enough really bad food, you can make a diabetic response in response to your behavior or your habits. And so that's kind of how I think about that.
So it's a disease of adaptation.
Yes, that's a great way to say it.
But not listed in the DSM, right?
Right. And that's the thing that's crazy to me. So alcohol use disorder is what's listed in the DSM, and that's this spectrum. Alcoholic does not leave room for spectrum. There's no black and white in that term. Either you are, you aren't, you're in or you're out. And if you're in, you need to never drink again, because you have one drink and you're basically going to end up dead, is like the common belief. And, when somebody identifies as an alcoholic, and I understand now, I didn't then, why there's so much allegiance to this word, is because for somebody who is identifying as an alcoholic, they have finally given name to the thing that's wrong, and then they know that they can never have a drink again in safety. And so that identification and that separation of themselves keeps them sober to some degree. Now, it doesn't work. I mean, the statistics on how effective that entire thing is are very little, but we didn't have anything sort of before we had AA. So I can't claim to not be very grateful for that. But what the term does that I think really messes us up as a society is it does exactly what it did in my experience of saying, well, if I'm not, then where do I fit, right? According to the CDC, only 10% of people are chemically addicted to alcohol. Not even people, 10% of excessive drinkers are chemically addicted to alcohol. 90% of excessive drinkers are not. Right? So if you are in that 90%, you don't fit in the alcoholic. In fact, if you walked into AA and you told some of your stories, like I spilled beer on my kids once and, my teeth were purple, they'd be like, oh yeah, you don't really belong here. Wait until it progresses further and then welcome back, sort of thing. And so I think that, I've been told I'm not a real alcoholic. That's one of the criticisms I get. Well, who are you to talk about this? You're not a real alcoholic. But according to the DSM, it is this spectrum, right? And it starts out slowly, and alcohol changes how your brain responds to alcohol. And over time, it creates a tolerance, which is basically an immunity. It's your body saying, I need to purge this toxin faster, and so I'm going to get more efficient at it. And then over time, you become more and more addicted to it. But it basically leaves everybody else in this, I'm a regular drinker or I'm a normal drinker, And that by itself creates all that shame we were talking about even questioning your drinking. So the question isn't, would I be happier drinking less? You don't sit down, if we were going to sit down over some donuts, which you and I probably would never do, but if we were, we would be like, oh, I'm just going to have one because all the sugar and the calories and whatever. But we would never sit down over a glass of Chardonnay and be like, oh, I'm just going to have one because of the liver cancer and the, breast cancer. Like, it just wouldn't happen. And I think because we have this term for those people, and it's an us and them mentality, a black and white mentality, questioning it becomes, the question is, am I an alcoholic? It's not the question we should be asking, which is, would I be happier drinking a bit less? And I think that's really, really the crux of it.
Yeah. And doesn't it just boil down to, instead of the message of, if you have a problem with alcohol, you're an alcoholic. To me, I really love your message, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting it, but the what I took away from you in our early conversations and even now is that it's not about being an alcoholic or not an alcoholic. It's about having an addiction to alcohol, which could be strong or weak, right? And there's a spectrum. But at the end of the day, it's like, look, you're just addicted to it. It's addictive. It's an addictive substance, right? And the fact that you've consumed it, right, has now created an addiction, either psychological, mental, or physical. Can be either or, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the real issue. It's like, look, you're addicted to it, right? And it's probably producing some things in your life that you don't like as a result. And so the ultimate goal is just to break the addiction, not necessarily to become something or to assume this new identity or stigma or whatever on your life. And I know it's controversial. I know some people don't want to hear that, but I have the same attitudes toward diet. And so this is an analogy that works, I think. People ask me all the time, like, are you vegetarian? Are you vegan? Right? My answer is no. I'm neither of those things. I don't like dietary identities, right? I'm not a thing, right? I'm not, like, I have enough identities in my life. I'm a believer, I'm a husband, I'm a dad, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a blogger, I'm a, whatever, right? There's a long list of things that I'm happy to say I am. I'm a Christian, believer, same thing. So, like, happy to say I'm those things. And those things define me. But, like, I don't want to be defined by what I eat, right?
Right.
And so even if I don't eat any animal food, right? Technically, that would be vegan, right? But I don't identify as a vegan because I don't like dietary identities. So my answer to that question is usually not that long of a rant. It's usually something like, well, I don't really like dietary identities, but I eat a plant-based diet. Right? That's the way I eat. It's not who I am.
Right.
So same thing, right? It's like not drinking because, you have a strong proclivity or addiction toward alcohol or whatever. It doesn't necessarily make you an alcoholic, and you don't have to define yourself as an alcoholic just because you decided to not drink and you had a strong addiction with alcohol in the past.
Yeah, and I think there's two main things that I'd sort of say about that. I mean, one is that, just like you said, it gives us this false sense of security by obscuring the addictive nature of alcohol. So it makes it seem normal to consume alcohol and not become addicted to it, and abnormal to consume alcohol and become addicted to it. When our physiological, like, that's not true. Like, we're all made up of blood and flesh and bone, and alcohol is an addictive substance. They've given it to, rats. Every rat becomes addicted. It's not like only the alcoholic rats become addicted. And so it just, sometimes I'm like, wow, that term was probably invented by the industry, or if not, the industry is really thankful that it exists, because it means that you're not normal if you become addicted to it. And it's normal to be able to drink it and not become addicted to it. But our bodies just aren't designed to drink alcohol in quantities. So it's just crazy in that regard. And the other thing, speaking of the identity, is that when you take on that identity, you really make alcohol front and center in your life, right? Like, alcohol for the alcoholic who's attending, and not that there's anything wrong. If that's how you stay sober, I just want to caveat that all paths are fine. But, like, I knew for me, I did not want to give power to alcohol in that regard by defining who I was, by constantly living a battle with it, by attending meetings. I wanted it to be small and irrelevant. I wanted to go back to the state of mind that I used to have, where it was like, I don't even have emotion about it because it doesn't blip on my radar. It's not something I'm dealing with every day. Whereas alcoholic, you're putting it front and center in your life. I think in sobriety, alcoholics think about alcohol, and I'm speaking from, experience with the alcoholics I know, they think about alcohol, at least in the first few years, far more than somebody who's just drinking on occasion, not really thinking about it. I wanted alcohol to be small and irrelevant in my life. And that label was exactly the opposite.
Yeah. And then there's the other stigma of you building up so much time, between drinks that this whole falling off the wagon, stigma,
Absolutely.
which is, the guilt and the shame and the failure, like everything that's associated with, if you have a drink, you have failed yourself, you've, totally screwed up like that. To me, I just have so much, I can't articulate the right word. Like the word is, I'm not able to pull it out of the ether, but like it bothers my spirit that people are struggling with that. They're struggling in that world and in that cycle and that belief system that I'm an alcoholic. I can never drink again. If I drink again, I've failed myself. And like, again, it's just not me trying to talk people into drinking again. That's not the point, right? Like the point is, like, I think you can live. I just love the fact that you're helping people live out alcohol free outside of the stigma of alcoholism and AA and that world. And granted, hey, it's helping some people. That's wonderful. Some people's lives are a huge mess, and AA helped them turn their lives around. So like, I'm with you. Like, great, that's great. But I think, and the reason I wanted to interview you is because I think there's a ton of people that don't fit the AA model,
Right.
that are addicted to alcohol, and they need help, and they just AA doesn't fit them. It doesn't make sense to them, or they don't want to do it, or there's too much stigma, or like it just is not. It just won't work for them, right? And I think what you're doing is the solution.
And I feel like when I started down this path, I had this kind of vision of being on a train and realizing like the things like drinking in the morning before I'd go into work after landing from a flight, or all these lines, these that I was crossing in my head. I had this moment of clarity of being like, wow, I see the destination. I see that this is, the more I drink, the more I'm going to want to drink. There's no end to the desire that's going to be created by more consumption. And the destination of this train is it's going to crash. And guess what? I can get off this before it crashes. Whereas if you have to declare yourself to be an alcoholic before you can get off the train, guess what? You're going to stay on the train, because that level of kind of, have human beings, we want freedom, we want power, we want to know that we're in control. And the first step is like surrender, complete surrender. So in order for somebody to be able to say, I am powerless against alcohol, and to surrender that much control to, some substance in a glass, where you have to hit in your life. So I think, to be frank, I think the term alcoholic necessitates a rock bottom experience. And there is no reason that anybody who's emotionally addicted, or even just drinking more than they want to be, needs to have a rock bottom experience. Like there's no reason. We can all get off the train before it goes any further, towards the nasty destination.
There's something else I was thinking about that I meant to mention a second ago, which was that along with the stigma of alcoholism and falling off the wagon, there's also something psychological that when a person does fall off the wagon, right? Then it's like all of a sudden, like, oh, I had a drink. Oh, I had a drink. I might as well just like blow it out, right? It's something, there's some kind of programming in there that all of a sudden they can't just be like, oh, I had a drink and I can stop now. Right. And it's not a big deal. Instead, it's, I had a drink. This is a huge deal. Right. I got to take this chip out of my pocket, got to start over. So I just might as well drink myself into unconsciousness, right? Or go on a bender and drink for like 2 weeks, straight or something. And then finally, and then I'll eventually get, so fed up with myself and so disgusted with myself that I'll go back to AA meetings and try again.
Yeah,
And
and there's
I just think
actually
that's really hard for humans psychologically. You just building this thing, giving alcohol so much power.
there's actually a scientific term that was coined, and it doesn't have the most PC name, but it was in 2010. This researcher, Janet Polivy, she discovered this "what the hell" effect, and it was actually with dieting. She was a dieting researcher, and it was the type of thinking that says, "What the hell? My diet's already broken, so I might as well eat everything in sight." And so basically,
Yes.
that's the exact same thing that happens with alcohol. Is, oh, I had a sip, or people will be like, I've seen it happen with, drinking a kombucha and having it have a 0.5%. And somebody's like, oh, well, now I'm not sober anymore. So, I might as well just go completely crazy. And so even you can accidentally fall off the wagon, and people questioning your sobriety and whatnot. And it's totally a true phenomenon, and it's scary and it's dangerous, and it is completely fear and shame based.
Yeah. Yeah. Guilt, fear, and shame. It's interesting. I mean, I just love what you're doing so much. And I feel like I'm excited to see the feedback from this interview, because I know people are going to get your book, probably both your books, This Naked Mind and which one would you recommend they get first? The Alcohol Experiment or Control Alcohol?
So I think it totally depends if it's a completely different approach. The Alcohol Experiment, you open the book day one, you take a 30-day break. If you're feeling like, yeah, I could take 30 days off alcohol, no problem, easy peasy. I just want the mindset shift. Let me do it. Let me take the experiment, see how I feel. The whole idea is like, you're going to feel better. Let me prove it to you. If you feel in that camp, the Alcohol Experiment's awesome. If you feel in I don't know, I think I'd have a hard time even taking a week off. I'd feel pretty deprived. I would do This Naked Mind, because This Naked Mind, in the first chapter, it says, don't stop drinking. Wait until you have the mindset shift, read this entire book, and then make a decision. And so actually, if you're in that camp, you read This Naked Mind, go through the whole mindset shift, and then you're like, all right, I want to do 30 days, boom, do the Alcohol Experiment. You don't have to, but I think that's kind of a nice thing. But This Naked Mind is really written from the get off the, if you're already in the cycle where you're making rules and you're breaking them and you're questioning and you feel guilty and you have all this shame and guilt around drinking already, This Naked Mind will really free you from that. That's what it does in the first few chapters. You'll start to feel better.
That's awesome. And I love the fact that you have two different paths for people depending on where they're at with alcohol, right? They're like, I'm ready to stop right now, or I am not ready to stop, but I want to stop.
Yeah, I'm curious.
And I need some help, like getting my mind around it. And yeah, that's so good. There was something else I was thinking about, and then now I feel like I've lost it. But we were talking about the power of alcohol and the stigma and stuff of AA and all that. What kind of feedback have you gotten, from that community, positive and negative?
So it's really, I will say, evolved over the years, which has been great and refreshing. When I first published This Naked Mind, it was back in 2015, and I actually had a group of people band together to get me to not publish it. And they made a whole campaign emailing me, trying to Skype me, trying to get me on everything, saying that I was going to kill people by telling them they didn't have to go to meetings. Because keep in mind, the draft of all my journals was out there already in the ether. So that's how I started to get feedback way before the book was published. And it was intense. I mean, it was probably the most intense because I was not at all prepared for it. In fact, I went to my friend with this whole, I stopped drinking too, and this is what I learned and all this stuff. And I thought, oh, this is going to be met with open arms. This is going to be amazing. it was not meant with open arms. It was meant with like a, whoa, 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 you didn't do it this way. This is the way you have to do it. It was a very much, okay, well, as soon as that doesn't work for you, we have a seat for you open at the meeting. So you let us know and enjoy that while you're going on that path that's destined for failure. And so I was like, wow, I thought we were on the same team. I was like, I can't believe this. And so there's such a belief that I think now I understand that a lot of that comes from fear. Like if I'm saying there's a different way, or I'm saying the term alcoholic actually isn't scientifically or medically based, doesn't exist in the DSM, and it's not really a real thing, but that's the term that's keeping you from this life of losing everything. And, there's nothing worse than drinking yourself sick, literally being sick, and then being so compelled by alcohol that you start drinking more as soon as you stop throwing up. And I mean, that is the state that some people walk into meetings in, of not being on benders that are 5 and 10 days long that put them in the hospital. And I have so much, although that wasn't my experience, I have so many stories and people I've gone to know and love that have had that experience, that I have so much empathy that now I can see, okay, that was all fear-based, because if I'm telling them, if I'm just saying, I'm not even telling them, but I'm just saying in the world that, look, this term needs to be reevaluated, because I think actually the term alcoholic is doing a lot more harm in our society as a whole than good, because it's creating this us and them mentality, because it's obscuring the addictive nature of alcohol, because it's making it so that everybody has a free pass. And by the way, it's making it totally stigma and shame and guilt based to even question your drinking. And all of these things are happening as a result of this term. People just really got defensive and up in arms. I will say that the entire, I would say, recovery community, which I don't really identify as being in recovery or sober, it's back to all those labels, but that entire community has really shifted, I'd say, beautifully over the last 3 or 4 years, to say, okay, all paths are, and yes, there's still the fringe, there's still the very intense. I still get plenty of 1-star reviews by AA people who've never read the book, but they just hate the premise. And I noticed that the 1-star reviews are mostly from people who have never read an actual book. That's so fascinating. But it is definitely shifting in a more inclusive way, which is beautiful. It's evolving as everything should. But
so many parallels, when I decided to take a holistic approach to healing cancer, right? I said no to chemotherapy, and because I knew it would make me sick and it was toxic, and I just didn't feel that it was right for me at the time, and I wanted to build my body back up. I wanted to focus on healing, not on therapies that were destructive. And I was met with the same exact sort of fear-based resistance that you were, right? I thought people would be excited about what I learned and what I was doing and changing my life, right? And no, they were not. They were not excited at all. They were like, oh, that's a mistake. Don't do that. That doesn't work, right? Doctors were telling me this, family members were telling me this, and it's a pretty lousy feeling, right? When you're really excited about something and you're getting results, or I wasn't getting results yet because it was very early, but I had just had such a strong conviction about it, and everyone around me is just telling me I'm wrong, and that it's a mistake, and it's like, that just doesn't feel good at all. But it's so great to see that you've made so much headway with this message, because I think it's just it's a healthier message. Right? Not just the health of not drinking, right? But like physiologically, yes, but mentally and emotionally, it's so much of a healthier message to help people understand, like, alcohol is addictive, right? It's going to cause problems in your life if you're addicted to it. You don't have to become, you don't have to be stigmatized. You just have to decide if you want to stop drinking or quit drinking. Like, there's a path to it, right? Without the stigma, which is great. Like, there's a path to being healthy and losing weight without the stigma, right? Without cheat meals and cheat days and all this kind of stuff, right? It's the same deal. Like, you don't have to be a food addict. Everybody's a food addict, right?
Right. Absolutely.
We all need it, right? But, so I also think, and I might be repeating myself, but the distinction, and this is such a glaring distinction, the 30-day alcohol experiment, where you're saying, okay, let's walk through this for 30 days, and then you need to have a drink, right? versus the AA 30 days and then never drink again, right? 30 days and you get a chip, right? But then you just still can never drink. And I don't know this from personal experience, but I feel like I can see the value in going back to something after 30 days of being away from it and going back to it with a quote unquote sober mindset about it, and rationally evaluating, like, is this adding anything to my life?
And I've done that with other things too, like sugar, right? Like take a break.
Yeah.
And really allow for the physical aspects of withdrawal and your body compensating for all the overstimulation. And sugar, high fructose corn syrup does the exact same dopamine response as alcohol does, overstimulates the dopamine receptors, all that stuff. And then going back and like mindfully eating something sugary that you used to love and being like, wow, actually, these cherries right here, they taste a lot better than that, right? And so I think it's so true. And it's everything we're talking about works with humanity. Like, as humans, we are not meant for constraints and rules. We're meant to live beyond rules and freedom. Everything is permissible. It doesn't mean everything is good for you, but you are a grown human being and you can make any decision you want. And if we don't treat you that way, and if you don't treat yourself that way, then you are destined to rebel against whatever rules. I mean, that is the whole premise of that what the hell effect, right? Putting rules and hemming yourself in, you will rebel against that. But when you don't have rules, I was thinking about this the other day, kind of applying the thinking methodology from alcohol to food. And the thinking methodology I use is like just awareness and then clarity and then turnaround. And if you eat a piece of cake and your thought is, oh, I shouldn't have eaten that piece of cake, what does that make you feel and how does it make you act, right? It makes you feel guilt and shame and hemmed in and rules, and it makes you act like, fine, well, I'll just eat 5 more pieces because it doesn't matter anyway. I'm never going to lose this 10 pounds. Like, I'm never going to be able to give up sugar, whatever. But if you change your thought in that moment and say, okay, I made that choice and it wasn't worth it, then how does that make you feel? How does that make you show up? Then the next time you're presented with a piece of cake, you're like, oh, I remember that wasn't worth it, but there's no guilt or shame or rules attached. Then you're making like a totally responsible, empowered choice. And that's working with all of human nature, right? You're working with the brain, not against the brain. And that's where change that isn't white knuckling, nail biting change that's truly from your core because you own it and you want it. That's where that happens. Because at the end of the day, us humans, most of the stuff we do is because we feel like doing it.
Yeah.
And if you can't change how you feel about it, you're in trouble from the beginning.
Changing the desires, right? The root cause of desire. Like I said, my goal is to get people to desire healthy food, right? They want it. They're excited about it. It's like they don't crave junk food anymore because they have such a deep foundation of understanding of the benefits of eating healthy that that's what they want, right? And it's the reverse for you. It's just a deep foundation of understanding of the detriments of alcohol that they're like, no, I don't want that, right? So this has been so fun. Amazing. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, Annie, for taking the time to talk to me, for sharing your wisdom, for what you're doing in the world. It's just wonderful. And for everybody watching, I'll put links to Annie, to her books, to her website, so you can connect with her if you feel like this is something that is speaking to you, or if somebody is maybe struggling with this, please share this video. I think there's a lot of people in the world. I mean, alcohol is everywhere, and there's a ton of people in the world that are probably drinking more than they need to. And just on the health and wellness front, right? I mean, I've looked at almost every alcohol and cancer study I can find. There's a lot of them, and I've read a lot, and I'm always making new videos and updating people with the latest studies. But yeah, the reality is, if you're just looking at it from a health and wellness cancer prevention standpoint, I think the latest research is like, look, you really can't have more than 1 or 2 drinks a week. If you have more than 1 to 2 drinks a week, you are raising your risk of cancer, right? And so at that level, it's pretty unlikely alcohol is going to have any damaging effect to you mentally or socially or emotionally or physically, right? 1 to 2 drinks a week.
Right.
But for some people, it's, it needs to be all or nothing. And I get that too. It's a kind of a slippery slope. As you said, with the what the hell effect, where it's like, oh, I had one, I might as well drink the whole box.
And no matter what your goal is, I mean, because so many people come to me and their goal is moderation and they become really successful at that goal. And that's a beautiful goal. I mean, it's a harm reduction, but no matter what it is, it really starts with shifting that desire. Because even at 1 to 2 drinks, if you want to have 10 a week and you're having 2, you feel deprivation. But if you can get to where your desire is shifted, that you really only want to drink every now and then, that's such a freeing place to be.
That's freedom. Absolutely. And I love that is, that people, that's accepted in your community, right? That It's not like, oh, you're drinking. Oh, you had a drink. Oh, you know what I mean? It's like, no, yeah. I mean, it's okay. Like if you don't have a problem with it, if you're enjoying an occasional glass, like there's no scientific evidence of harm of an occasional glass and there's very little risk of harm of others. Like, okay, great. But like, if you have a problem, let's take some serious steps and like,
not only my
problem.
community, my company. Like, we don't have, there's a few of us teetotalers on the staff, but not everybody. A lot of people, it's just because it's such a non-issue. It's not defining either way.
Yeah.
And there's no difference between, someone on my team who has a few drinks and someone who doesn't. Obviously if it was a problem, but it's very much like, I believe that to my core. I don't think that we're going to shift society by focusing on the fringes of people who are drinking far too much, going all the way to the fringes of people who are teetotal and never drinking again. It's got to be this shift, this conversational shift to make it okay to talk about it has to happen in like the middle. It has to happen.
Well, and I'll throw one more parallel in there, and I want to be respectful of your time, but it's just so fun to talk about this stuff. But the one more parallel between that and healthy eating and my message is that, then this ties back to what I said earlier about veganism and vegetarianism. Both in a lot of ways are an all or nothing deal, mm-hmm. right? And especially veganism, right? So if someone says I'm a vegan now, right, they're automatically subjected to a set of rules, right, by which they must live their life, and it can get very intense, right? The rule number 1 is not eating anything from an animal, but then like rule number 2 is like not buying anything that an animal was involved in manufacturing. I said, obviously it starts with leather, and then it's like, well, wait a second, where did the glue in your shoes come from, right? And so there's a lot of rules to veganism. If you want to, be a card-carrying vegan in good status in the community. And my opinion on veganism is the same as your opinion, I think, on maybe alcoholism in that what I know about health and nutrition is that the healthiest, longest living people eat plant-based diets, but they're not pure vegan. And so what I want to do is I want to reach people with the message of, hey, you need to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. Your diet needs to be mostly plants. You don't have to be a vegan to be healthy. You don't have to be a vegan to prevent cancer. Based on all the science, you don't have to. But you do have to cut way back, right? The junk food's got to go. Right? Only on special occasions. The animal food needs to be reduced way down to somewhere between a few times a week to a few times a month. And that method alone will reduce animal consumption, a person's animal consumption. Let me say it a different way. If a person goes from eating meat 3 times a day to eating meat 3 times a week, they reduce their animal consumption by 80%. Right?
Wow.
80%. So you're still not even a vegan, right? But 3 times a day to 3 times a week. And what does that do? Well, the ripple effect, A, they have wonderful benefits in their health. It's maintainable. It's not all or nothing. There's no failure, right? And B, if we could convince, the population, which I think is an easier sell, right? Eat less versus never eat an animal again. But if I can convince the population, if I'm successful in my lifetime and really make a big impact in people's diets and health and convince a large number of people, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, whatever, to eat meat 3 times a week instead of 3 times a day, that will bankrupt the factory farming industry, right? Yeah. An 80% reduction in the demand for animal foods, factory farms go belly up. So anyway, I know this is kind of off the rails, but it's the same exact philosophy about encouraging people to change, like meeting them where they're at, right? And giving them something that is a program or a lifestyle or a mindset that's sustainable, right? It's a sustainable approach to recovering from alcohol addiction. It's a sustainable approach to eating healthy and preventing disease and healing disease. Like, there are definitely periods where it needs to be all or nothing, right? There's that all or nothing intensive period with diet, with alcohol. But then once, that's pretty tough to maintain for life.
Right.
So there's like, and I think this is the same in your world, maybe slightly different, but in my world, it's like, look, if you're trying to heal cancer, there's an intensive phase, like no animal food, no junk food, like no alcohol, like we've got to eliminate everything that could possibly harm you, like every molecule, like we want to cut those things out of your life. But there will be a time when you can have a new normal that allows for recreational food, right? And the occasional treat and things like that, right? In their proper perspective, which is like less than 1% of your diet, that kind of thing. So anyway, you got me fired up. I love your message, Annie. Thank you for your time. This has been so fun.
Oh, it's been awesome. And just to say quickly, that is exactly the reframe that I give people. So if they do 30 days and they're like, well, I wasn't successful, I drank 3 days. I'm like, okay, that's like over a 90% success rate. Like, let's celebrate that.
Yes.
Where else in the world have we said that unless you're 100%, you're a failure? School doesn't even work like that. Nothing works like that.
Right. Exactly. Thank you. Yes. That was like the last little part of my point that I didn't get to. It was like, let's celebrate people's successes. Like, hey, vegan friends, let's celebrate the fact that so many people now are eating way less animals, right? Yeah. They're on their way to eating very few to little to none animals. Like, let's celebrate and encourage those people and not like beat them up and attack them because they're, they haven't quite hit your standard yet. So
awesome.
You're awesome. This has been fun. Everybody, thanks for watching. Please share this. It's valuable. If you've made it this far in the interview, you know how good it is. So please share it. And I will post show notes below the video. If you're watching on YouTube, obviously they'll be below on chrisbeatcancer.com and in the links in the podcast. So I think I've said everything I want to say. And Annie, again, my third time to say thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was awesome.
Bye-bye.